So far in our video series learning about persuasion in your life, we've talked about subjects like persuasive theories, argumentation, persuasion in social media, and how persuasion is used in advertising and public relations. Now we're going to get personal. That's right, personal. The purpose of this video is to ponder persuasion in personal relationships. It's one thing to talk about persuasion in the abstract, but quite another when talking about how persuasion occurs in our personal relationships. The two words I just put together, personal relationships, are meaningful words that need to be unpacked and placed in the context of persuasion. The words or phrase, personal relationships, is the everyday way to express what students and scholars of communication refer to as interpersonal relationships. Interpersonal communication and relationships are different than other types. You can have intra-communication, meaning talking with yourself. You can communicate with a small group of people. And you can communicate with a mass audience. But when we say interpersonal communication or refer to interpersonal relationships, we are narrowing the focus to a particular kind of relationship. An interpersonal relationship and its communication occurs between two people within the context of a relationship where the two people are interdependent on one another. This is why we say it is personal. It's not just a casual conversation between two people who don't have a relationship, like when you speak to a cashier at a store or interact with them. This communication occurs and continues as part of an ongoing relationship. What happens inside the relationship impacts both, thus making it interdependent. Remember that a personal or interpersonal relationship might be referring to a work relationship, a family or a friend relationship, or an intimate relationship. Now that we've clarified this concept of personal relationships, let's connect this with the persuasion that occurs in our interpersonal relationships. Now, watch yourself because we might be talking about you. As we begin talking about the power of persuasion and relationships, I can't help but share a personal axiom I believe strongly about relationships. The axiom is this: we should treat the people we are in a relationship with, the people we are close with, the people we are most concerned about, with the most respect and the best behavior. Too often in our close relationships, no matter the type, it's easy to let our guard down and expect people we are in a relationship with to forgive our poor behavior, our bad moods, our pouting, or our rudeness. I share this axiom because if we are going to talk about the power of persuasion in personal relationships, this should be the starting point. I believe this axiom should guide our actions regarding the use of power and persuasion in dealing with the people in our lives. If you're going to study the power of persuasion and interpersonal relationships, we need to understand ways people express power in good and maybe not so good ways. To study our topic, we will discuss influence goals in relationships and principles of power. Let's explore influence goals in relationships. People who are in interpersonal relationships constantly share persuasive messages, meaning messages that are intended to influence or to persuade the other person. J.P. Dillard in 1989 wrote an article titled Types of Influence Goals in Relationships about 7 goals that people in intimate relationships might have for persuasive messages. He lists them as being: 1. To make lifestyle changes. 2. To gain assistance in doing something. 3. To share an activity together. 4. To have sex. 5. To change a political stance. 6. Promoting health. And 7. Offering relationship advice. These are not just influence goals that apply to an intimate relationship. Many of these influence goals apply in work, family, and friend type of interpersonal relationships as well. Many of these influence goals are directed at a desire for something positive in the other person's life, and some are influence goals directed at obtaining something from the relationship. I'm sure you can recall many of these types of conversations, influence and persuasion conversations, you might have instigated or been on the receiving end of. In discussing influencing people that we are in a relationship with, any type of relationship, we also need to discuss the topic of power, in particular the 6 principles of power. The reality is that people in relationships do attempt to influence and persuade using power. You can apply this to work relationships, family or friend relationships, and intimate relationships. The authors Gerardo Anderson and Afifi write in their 2013 book, Close Encounters, Communication in Relationships, that there are 6 principles of power. The first principle of power is the perception principle. People are influenced by people that they perceive to have greater status or power. The perception may or may not be correct. People often create an aura of power with the clothes they wear, how they carry themselves, or the words they use in order to get people to perceive them as a person of authority and power. The second principle of power is the relational principle. In relationships, there is the reality of the balance of power. One person might be more dominant. One might be more powerful because they have the control of spending. Or one might have less power because of their personality. The third principle of power is the resources principle. Basically, in a relationship, the scarcer the resource, the greater the possibility it can be used as power. Relationships have resources like time, money, status, affection, expressions of love, and support. Every one of these things is a commodity. If one person has it and the other person desires it, whatever the resource, then that resource can be used to gain something from the other person. The fourth principle of power is dependency power. If one person has less to lose in a relationship than they have more power. The opposite is true, that if you have more to lose, you are more dependent to the relationship. If this is the perception of the parties in the relationship, then one has more power. The fifth principle of power is persuasive power. This is really talking about the fact that in a relationship, one party can dominate because they have an increased persuasive power over the other person. One person might be a more verbal person or a more verbally aggressive person, and therefore be able to exert this type of power. The sixth principle of power is prerogative power. Prerogative power is the ability that one person might have to create and enforce rules, but also to dissolve rules at their prerogative, often with little consequence. This is really the power to convince the other person that they have the power to set the rules. People can and do use these six principles of power in personal relationships all the time. Sometimes these principles are used very much on purpose, and other times without even thinking about them or the potential impact on the interpersonal relationship. Toward the beginning of this video, I shared the axiom that we should treat people we have an interdependent, interpersonal relationship with the most concern, the most respect, and the best behavior. I believe this is true no matter the relationship, in business relationship, friends, and with our intimate relationships. I worked in sales for many years and found that if I wanted to have power, the power to influence and persuade in my sales, I needed to put the other person first. This is called solution selling, meaning you are trying to solve the problem of the client or customer first, instead of trying to use a verbal power play to persuade. Applying this axiom in any personal relationship provides power in the relationship instead of power over the other person in the relationship. Things to consider in exploring persuasion in personal relationships. See you in the next video.